Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. We've got a lot to unpack. First, I want to go over, had a nice weekend. Went on Saturday morning to an event in Orford, put on by the Orford Fire Department. I believe it was a fundraiser for the Orford Fire Department. It was a flea market. Sat with New Hampshire Republicans, Grafton County Republicans at their booth. Beautiful weather, lots of people, 200 booths, really great crowd. Like I said, great weather. The fire department had burgers and dogs and fries and refreshments. It was good. It was a very good day. Very good day. So I want to get right into part of the show. And, you know, ladies and gentlemen, I harp on a lot of the environmental stuff because it's important here in Vermont, especially. We are especially environmentally conscious. This is on a national level. Secretary Burgum announces order to rein in environmentally damaging wind and solar projects. Now, Doug Burgum is the head of the Department of Interior. This is dated 8/1/2025, Washington. Today, U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, signed a secretary's order to more efficiently manage our nation's energy resources by permitting projects that optimize energy generation while minimizing their environmental impact. Massive, unreliable energy projects such as wind and solar are inefficient uses of federal lands when compared to other energy sources with much smaller footprints like nuclear, gas, and coal. Sounds like we are getting some common sense instituted here at the federal level, ladies and gentlemen. In accordance with existing law and President Donald J. Trump's energy executive orders, the department will now consider proposed energy projects' capacity density when assessing the project's potential energy benefits to the nation and impacts to the environment and wildlife. Well, it's about time, especially with the respect to the massive wind turbines and how many birds they're killing. And with the offshore projects, their effects on migrating whales, right? So this is a good thing in my view. This order directs the department to permit only energy projects that are in the most appropriate use of the federal land and resources. And this is a quote here. Quote, gargantuan, unreliable, intermittent energy projects hold America back from achieving U.S. energy dominance while weighing heavily on the American taxpayer and environment, end quote, said Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum. By considering energy generation optimization, the department will be able to better manage our federal lands, minimize environmental impact, and maximize energy development to further the president's energy goals. This common sense order ensures our nation is stronger, our land use is optimized, and the American people are properly informed. Under the law, the department must consider reasonable alternatives to proposed projects and make land use decisions both onshore and offshore that are judicious. These laws ultimately raise the question of whether the use of federal lands for wind and solar projects is permissible, given these projects' encroachment on other land uses and their disproportionate land requirements, especially when reasonable project alternatives with higher capacity densities are technically and economically feasible. Now, the last part of this is really some of the most important. Based on data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, one advanced nuclear plant, 2X AP1000, and that's some sort of a standard, I guess, produces 33.17 megawatts per acre, while one offshore wind farm produces approximately 0.006 megawatts per acre, which is approximately 55 times less efficient than one nuclear plant. Thus, when there are reasonable project alternatives that can generate the same amount of more energy on far less federal lands, wind and solar projects may unnecessarily and unduly degrade federal lands. Here again, ladies and gentlemen, Common sense has finally broken through. The department will identify and make necessary revisions as appropriate and consistent with applicable law to any regulation, guidance, policies, or practices necessary to implement this Secretary's order. So this is good news, not only for the state of Vermont, in my view, because here we like our farmland. We love the idea of preserving our farmland and our forest, our working lands, and our conserved land. So this, I believe, is going to be a huge step in the right direction. And with that, I want to break. There's a little bit more news from the Department of Interior, but on the idea of wind and solar, there is a author on Substack. Let's see, Robert Bryce. You need to go on Substack and find this small. You might find it's a little short video documentary. It's only about 10 minutes long. It's called Sunblock, the global fight to save farmland from big solar. Take 10 minutes and look at it. Find it on Substack, like I said, Robert Bryce. Find it on X. You might even be able to find it on YouTube. It's worth the time to watch it. It really, truly is. It gives you an idea of what is going on, especially with farmland. We're seeing it not only in this country, we're seeing it in Europe. And the idea of taking good, productive pasture land, farmland in general, for growing vegetables or pasturing farm animals is not a very wise choice. And when you look, Robert Bryce gives great statistics as far as the size of these projects and what they're doing to the amount of farmland and how efficient, like I quoted in the Secretary's, Doug Burgum's order, the efficiency compared to the number of acres that they cover. It just doesn't make good common sense when we're talking about this. So I wanted to just include that because the documentary that Robert Bryce did it's short, but it's very good, and it needs to spread far and wide. One other thing from the Department of Interior. This one is dated 8/4/2025. Interior Department announces $102.9 million for wetland conservation projects. Let's see. The Department of Interior today announced $102.9 million in North American Wetlands Conservation Act funding has been approved by the Migratory Bird Conservation Commission, providing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and its partners the ability to conserve, restore, or enhance 548,242 acres of critical wetland and associated upland habitat for migratory birds across North America. Now, I'm hoping, and I couldn't find it, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm guessing that somewhere in there will be a few dollars for both Vermont and New Hampshire to take advantage of some of this grant money to preserve some of the valuable wetlands that we do have in the area, in the Northeast. Partners will provide more than $201 million in matching funds. Let's see. Quote, for more than 35 years, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act has fostered partnerships and an investment in wetland conservation that yield both ecological and economic returns for local communities and a broad range of industries, including tourism. We like that here in Vermont and in New Hampshire. Commercial fisheries, forestry, and agriculture. We enjoy our forestry and agriculture in this state, don't we? So that was a quote from Secretary Burgum. Let's see. These grants will increase and maintain healthy bird populations and wetland habitat while supporting local economies, improving public access to recreational activities for American traditions such as hunting, fishing, and bird watching. Well, those are traditions that we really enjoy here in Vermont. So I'm thankful to see that there will be some federal dollars out there. And this is from DOI.gov. So if you wanted to find this, that's how you would be able to find it, www.doi.gov. and you'll be able to find a number of the press releases. So there's a lot of good stuff going on at the national level. One more thing, and I don't know if I'll have enough time, but I've been chomping at the bit to talk about this. If we jump to the EPA.gov, let's see. This is August 1, 2025. Leaders praise the EPA for launching largest deregulatory action in U.S. history with proposal to rescind Obama-era endangerment finding. Now, the endangerment finding is what has helped to cost many, many taxpayers in the order of $1 trillion. So let's get into this argument. Earlier this week, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin released the agency's proposal to rescind the 2009 endangerment finding, which has been used to justify over $1 trillion in regulations, including the Biden-Harris administration's electric vehicle mandate. Now, just a break from the article. If you want to buy an electric vehicle, I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with, and many people have a problem with, is the government forcing, any government, state or federal, forcing me to make a decision to buy a vehicle that I don't want. Let's see. If finalized, the proposal would repeal all greenhouse gas standards for light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles and heavy-duty engines, thereby reinstating consumer choice while decreasing the cost of living on all products that trucks deliver. It would also mark one of the largest deregulatory actions in American history. Now, imagine what it would do not just for the economy of Vermont and New Hampshire, but the country as a whole. This is going to help to jumpstart, on top of some of the other initiatives of the federal government, this will help to jumpstart the economy. The endangerment finding is the legal prerequisite used by the Obama and Biden administrations to regulate emissions from new motor vehicles and new motor vehicle engines. Absent this finding, EPA would lack statutory authority under Section 202A of the Clean Air Act to prescribe standards for greenhouse gas emissions. Excuse me. This proposal, if finalized, is expected to save Americans $54 billion in costs annually through the repeal of all greenhouse gas standards, including the Biden's EPA electric vehicle mandate under conservative economic forecast. Let's see. So there's a lot of good news if you are a free economy, a free market person like I am, and you want to allow people to make decisions. If they want to use wind and solar power, there are ways that you can install wind and solar on your own private property. But when it comes to taking federal and state dollars to subsidize massive 100 to 1,000 acre projects, and the Robert Bryce Substack that I referred to includes thousands of acres of solar, then there is a big problem with that. You're talking about taking productive land, farmland in most cases, in the state of Vermont and New Hampshire. It may be a steep slope on the side of a mountain, but in many cases it's either forest land that is clear cut or pasture land that is taken out of production so that it may be used for solar farms. And we know solar and wind is intermittent. That is one of the major problems with it. It's intermittent. In February at 2 o'clock in the morning, when there's no sun and you need heat and lights, and your neighbors need heat and lights, then it's a problem if you're depending on solar. So natural gas and nuclear look like they are going to be making a comeback, ladies and gentlemen. And looking at the clock, I see that we are already to the end of a segment, so you're listening to Right Side Up.
Hampshire Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte has been making a lot of noise about how she's funding education. The Republican budget she just signed provides more money for education than ever before. She even bragged the other day that New Hampshire is top 10 in the country when it comes to funding our children's education, as if giving money to school systems has anything to do with learning. If you look at the math, and if you got schooled in New Hampshire, the odds are good it's not your best subject. It's the exact opposite. The more money we throw at schools, the less kids learn. We're committed to wasting money on an experiment that failed, unless wasting money to drive parents to homeschool their kids was the goal. We prefer to pick on Democrats, lower hanging fruit and all that, but our rhetorical woodshed doesn't discriminate. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
We talked at the first segment a little bit about conservation, a little bit about common sense when it comes to energy policy. I want to bring it back home to a little bit of both. And I say that because if you don't step back, zoom out, and look at the big picture, fixing one problem without taking into consideration all the others, you wind up with yourself in a pickle and you haven't fixed anything. I want to refer to an article, and I don't think I covered this before. This is from FYI-VT on May 31, 2025, and the title is Vermont's Land Lockdown, the Hidden Costs of 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 Conservation Goals. Now, conservation is a good thing if it is done in a measured and a well thought out fashion. But let me just get into this, and I think the author lays it out very well. Vermont's rural identity is rapidly shifting, not through legislation debated in the public square, but through a quiet transformation of land ownership, taxation, and access. At the heart of this shift is Act 59, passed in 2023, which commits Vermont to an ambitious plan to conserve, in quotes, 30% of its land by 2030 and 50% by 2050. Though framed as environmental stewardship, the practical impacts of this policy are economic, structural, and largely irreversible. And if we let it get too far, then I believe it would be irreversible. But if we pay attention to this now, I think we can stop the damage. Let me get back to the article here. The vision behind Act 59 aligns Vermont with the United Nations goal 30 by 30. That is a troubling. When you think about United Nations and Vermont aligning with the United Nations global 30 by 30, that to me is a red flag. Let's see, the global 30 by 30 biodiversity target and sets in motion a sweeping expansion of permanently conserved land. While supporters frame this as forward-thinking and ecologically responsible, the state's approach raises serious concerns about long-term affordability, land access, and constitutional property rights. And then I want to get back to one of the points I made before I started reading this. If you don't zoom out and look at everything, like the author just talked about, long-term affordability, land access, and constitutional property rights. If we don't think about all of these three at the same time, and then consider also the housing issue that we have in this state and the lack of the trades in this state to actually help to build the additional housing that we are in a deficit for. So there are a lot of moving parts that need to be taken into consideration here. Let's see, a shrinking tax base. As more land becomes conserved, either through state acquisition, nonprofit partnerships, or conservation easements, the amount of taxable land in Vermont shrinks. Land under conservation typically pays reduced taxes or none at all, depending on whether it's enrolled in current use or owned outright by a nonprofit or government entity. Currently, Vermont has already conserved over 1.3 million acres, or about 22% of its land area. Meeting the 30% goal by 2030 will require conserving roughly another 177,000 acres. Achieving the 50% mark by 2050 will bring the total to nearly 3 million acres, half the state. Now, that is a very lofty goal if you were to ask me. This land is not only removed from future development, it's removed from municipal tax base. As the pool of taxable land shrinks, the financial burden shifts to those who remain, typically homeowners, farmers, and small landowners. In 2000, the average tax burden per acre of land in Vermont was around plus or minus $144. Today, it's estimated at plus or minus $391. Let me say that again, $391. If current trajectories hold, that number could exceed $1,100 per acre by 2050. In simple terms, you will pay more because others are paying less or not at all, meaning the people who have the land because it's been put into a preservation or conservation easement. Let's see. The choice no one can afford. Supporters argue that conservation is voluntary, negotiated through willing landowners, but in practice, it often isn't. With soaring property taxes and an aging population of farmers and landowners, many Vermonters are financially cornered. Unable to sustain the cost of ownership, they are approached by conservation nonprofits offering easements or buyouts, deals they can't afford to refuse. And ladies and gentlemen, I talk to people all the time. I've talked to people just this past weekend in that same predicament, where they know what their taxes were, they know what they are today, they know where they're going, and they feel like their only choice is to sell. So this is a reality right now on the ground. It's not just an idea. It's actually happening on the ground right now. Organizations like the Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, VHCB, the Nature Conservancy, and the Vermont Natural Resources Council, VNRC, play a central role. Often backed by state and federal dollars and regular participants in legislative committees, these groups operate in tandem with regulatory authorities, shaping a long-term land use map that reflects global conservation goals more than local economic realities. That's a very key point. I need to repeat that. These groups operate in tandem with regulatory authorities, shaping a long-term land use map that reflects global conservation goals more than local economic realities, while Vermont property owners, taxpayers, and voters do not. Now, that to me, ladies and gentlemen, is a huge red flag. To be clear, this is not illegal, but it's not representative government either. It's policy by attrition. Mapping the convergence. Perhaps the most telling aspect of this transformation is how closely Vermont's conservation planning now resembles global sustainability corridor models, especially the much maligned Agenda 21 Wildlands map, which proposed large interconnected tracts of land with minimum or no human use. Ladies and gentlemen, in this state, that map is called the Vermont Conservation Design Map. You can go on, I believe, the ANR site and look at BioFinder, and this is what the author is referring to. Critics were once dismissed as paranoid for pointing to these maps, but now Vermont's official documents mirror them in both language and execution. And this is actually true. What the author just stated is actually true. Vermont Conservation Design Map, and it shows a number of the maps showing highest and priority connectivity blocks for long-term conservation and corridor planning. But the problem these maps start to give you is, what about the humanity? It raises the question, what about the humanity? We are in a situation where, in the state of Vermont especially, we have an aging population. We have a crisis where we do not have the age group of tradespeople mostly to help to get us out of a housing crisis. We are 41,000 homes, whether they be apartment units or freestanding single-family homes. We're 41,000 homes in a deficit right now. And when we have a 30 by 30, 50 by 50, Act 59, competing for land, then how are young families, retirees from other states who like the idea of living in Vermont but can't afford to come here because of land prices, how are they going to decide to come here when they're competing with a 30 by 30, 50 by 50? Okay, let's see. What does the Constitution say? Vermont's Article 2 states, quote, private property ought to be subservient to public uses when necessity requires it. Whenever any person's property is taken for the use of the public, the owner ought to receive an equivalent in money, end quote. That's a vague shield. What constitutes necessity, says the author? Who defines it? And does losing use and value through regulatory pressure without formal seizure count as a taking? And it's a very good point. That is a very good point. When you have the Vermont Conservation Design Map that proposes wildlife corridors, for instance, does that count as a taking? And have you ever heard of somebody saying, well, because of this, we're going to give you a tax break? Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I have not at all. So, meanwhile, Article 9 offers stronger protections. No part of any person's property can be justly taken or applied to public uses without the person's own consent or that of the representative body. But many land use decisions tied to Act 59 are not voted on by local residents, and that is also a true statement. Instead, they're driven by agencies and nonprofits executing global goals with state dollars and administrative authority. Consent is assumed, not granted. So there's Act 59. People do not realize is, I believe, more dangerous to our housing crisis than helpful. Much more dangerous. A future for whom? The central question remains: who is Vermont being conserved for? If middle-class Vermonters, working farmers, and rural families can no longer afford to live on or hold land here, then the future being preserved is one for tourists, transplants, and nonprofits, not for people who built this state. Very true. Conservation should not be a backdoor zoning tool, which it has become, ladies and gentlemen, nor should it be used to displace Vermonters under the guise of climate and biodiversity. Land preservation has a place, but when half the state is being locked up in perpetuity and the tax burden triples on what remains, it ceases to be conservation. It becomes control. And this was by Dave Sulia, and I agree. That was, let's see now, May 31, 2025. So the last statement by the author, just imagine for a minute, especially if you're born and raised in Vermont. Imagine leaving the state and coming back. Welcome to Vermont. If you'd like to live here, please send us your portfolio, your investments, and your pedigree, and we will get back to you to let you know if you qualify for ownership in the state. Is that what you want for the state of Vermont? That's not what I would like to see for the state of Vermont. We know what the heritage and the history of the state of Vermont is, and if we would like to live it and not only view it in a museum or go to the library and read about it and look at it in a book, then we need to be active in civically active. We need to find time, although we still have our families, we still have church, we still have our businesses, we still have the kids after school activities. We have all of that. I realize that. But remaining civically involved is how you stop the state from being taken from you, the state that you love from being taken from you. So I just wanted to point that out because it's very crucial. Like I said, Act 59 came out of a 2023 bill, but it's looming there in the background. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, it was talked about this past session, and it's not going to go away.
New Hampshire Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte has been making a lot of noise about how she's funding education. The Republican budget she just signed provides more money for education than ever before. She even bragged the other day that New Hampshire is top 10 in the country when it comes to funding our children's education, as if giving money to school systems has anything to do with learning. If you look at the math, and if you got schooled in New Hampshire, the odds are good it's not your best subject. It's the exact opposite. The more money we throw at schools, the less kids learn. We're committed to wasting money on an experiment that failed, unless wasting money to drive parents to homeschool their kids was the goal. We prefer to pick on Democrats, lower hanging fruit and all that, but our rhetorical woodshed doesn't discriminate. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
Listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. Before we get back into our discussion, I just want to remind all of our listeners, rightsideUpradio@gmail.com. If you'd like to drop us a line, you can find us, if you can't find us on the radio, at WNTK. WNTK.com on the internet. Find the podcast button. Click on it. Scroll down to Right Side Up, and you'll be able to listen to any number of our shows, and by all means, please share it with friends. You can find us on Podbean. You can find us on, graniterock.com. Thank you very much for the folks at Granite Rock. You can find us at 802 Scoop Facebook. You can find us at 802 Scoop Facebook. 802 Scoop Facebook and 802 Scoop YouTube. There we go. Got my tongue untied. So, I think I've covered all the business I need to cover. So, let's get back into the discussion here. I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about some common sense at the federal level. We talked about some conservation efforts at the legislative level at the state and how that may wind up coming back to bite us when it comes to land access and availability of land to maintain our population and our need for housing in this state. And I want to cover another article that appeared on FYIVT.com, but it was also picked up by Vermont Daily Chronicle. It's by Dave Sulia, Understanding Vermont's 5 Political Camps. Vermont's political scene may be small by population, but it's unusually crowded when it comes to ideological variety. While most states function under the sway of just Democrats and Republicans, Vermont is home to 5 active and distinct political identities: Vermont Democrats, Vermont Progressives, Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, Vermont Republicans, and Vermont Libertarians. Each group claims to represent the path toward a more just, prosperous, and free society, but their roadmaps are dramatically different. And understanding those differences isn't just academic. For decades now, state-level power in Vermont has been largely held by Democrats and progressives, with some overlap from Democratic Socialists. If you're wondering why the policies in place are what they are, this is where to look. Let's walk through the major ideological dividing lines using both their published platforms and practical policy priorities. Vermont Democrats, center-left reformers. The Vermont Democratic Party supports a regulated capitalist economy with strong social programs. They emphasize equity, inclusion, and environmental stewardship while promoting economic growth through state investments. With respect to health care, expand the Affordable Care Act, explore public options. Economy, keep capitalism but regulate it heavily. Education, strong public education with more funding and teacher support. Environment, climate change action is a key priority. Civil rights, strong support for LGBTQ plus rights, racial equity, and reproductive freedom. Now, with the civil rights question, Thomas Sowell, there's a great quote from Thomas Sowell, and I don't have it in front of me, but with respect to civil rights, Thomas Sowell asked, with respect to all these other gay rights, LGBTQ rights, the rights of this group, that group, what does civil rights mean then? If we have civil rights, then we don't need to go and have all of these subcategories, because civil rights are civil rights, and we don't need to have them because you have rights, period. We don't need to know your sexual preference or anything else. No one needs to know anything else about you because, okay, if you're, with respect to the Constitution of this state and the country, you have civil rights based on your constitutional rights. That's it. We don't need to know anything else about you. But that's just me. Let's see. The Democrats are the dominant party in Vermont, holding the majority in the legislature almost continuously since the 1990s. Many of their current policies are no longer just ideas, they are the status quo. Vermont progressives, the activist left. The Vermont Progressive Party is the largest third party in the state and often partners with Democrats on key legislation while pushing them to the left. They share some overlap but take bolder stances on corporate power, taxation, and social justice. Healthcare. Lean towards single-payer universal systems. Taxes. Fair share taxation for wealthy individuals with larger corporations. And I'm going to quote again, ladies and gentlemen, from Thomas Sowell. What exactly is your fair share of my paycheck? And I believe there's a great quote from Walter Williams, but I don't have it in my head about it. But he makes a similar reference. Foreign policy. Skeptical of U.S. military interventions. Criminal justice. Support for decriminalization and restorative justice methods. And ladies and gentlemen, to break from the article, we have seen the effect of this, the decriminalization and restorative justice models. They have contributed to less and less public safety, both the feeling of public safety and actual public safety. Look no further than the city of Burlington and all of the violence and drug use that has bled out into other cities and towns, even the smallest of towns in Vermont. So, in my view, that has been an abject failure. Okay, climate. We're still at the Progressive Party. Climate. Prioritize bold environmental protections, even at economic cost. And we've seen that in this state. And when, like I said earlier in the show, if we don't back out and take a larger view of the policies and stop doing feel-good policies and put in place policies that actually work, then we are going to never get out of the hole that we've dug for ourselves here in Vermont. Okay, let's see. Getting back to the article. While technically separate from the Democrats, many progressive legislators caucus with them, creating a de facto coalition that governs the state. And that is actually a very true statement, ladies and gentlemen. That is exactly what happens. Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. The National DSA platform, which the Green Mountain DSA is presumed to follow, does not merely call for reforms. It calls for replacing capitalism entirely with a socialist system guided by democratic processes. Let's see. Democratic Socialists call for seizing or nationalizing key industries and abolishing capitalism. That we've seen, history has shown us, if we don't in our school system teach true history, then we will never have our young people understanding that this has already been tried and it's always failed. It's always failed. There is no example of this type of a system working. Let's see, healthcare, Medicare for all, free at point of use. That would mean that you would have a healthcare policy and you probably wouldn't get any actual healthcare. Let's see, housing, massive public housing programs, rent control, and right to housing. Justice, abolitionist tone toward police and prisons. Immigration, open borders, and ending deportations. Well, we saw how effective that was last administration. That didn't seem to work very well for us, did it? Foreign policy, dismantle American global influence, and anti-imperialism is central. Okay. In Vermont, some progressive and Democrat figures, including high-profile names like Becca Balint, and she's been in the news and on social media, and we've seen some of the outrageous statements she's made. But the author says she is openly associated with DSA members or platforms, even if she doesn't formally join the organization. Vermont Republicans, traditional conservatives. The Vermont Republican Party favors individual liberty, free markets, and local control over state or federal mandates. While more moderate than national Republicans, they share core conservative values: economy, pro-business, anti-tax, limited regulation, healthcare, market-based with private competition, guns, firm Second Amendment protections, education, strong emphasis on parental rights and local boards, spending, fiscal restraint, and balanced budgets. Okay, now I need to break from the article here for a minute because I consider myself a constitutional conservative. Most of these descriptions, I would say, describe how I feel toward how the both local and federal government should be operating. So that just wanted to put that out there. Let's see. Vermont Libertarians, pure liberty, minimal state. The Vermont Libertarian Party closely mirrors the national platform, advocating for radical individual freedom in both economic and personal realms. They want the smallest government possible, with nearly all services privatized or left to voluntary charity. Healthcare, fully privatized free market care. I like that idea. Taxes, end the income tax, abolish the IRS. Still liking it. Guns, no restrictions at all. We've seen, ladies and gentlemen, in states that have gone back to constitutional carry when they had none, they have seen their crime levels fall. And statistically, let's see if I can remember the website. Oh, I can't off the top of my head, but if I do, I will just blurt it out to you. Education with respect to Vermont Libertarians, 100% private with total parental control. Drugs and sex work. Legalize everything, no victim, no crime. That, I think, would turn out to be very ugly. Foreign policy. End all foreign aid and military alliances. Let's see. The author's final thoughts. Vermont voters aren't limited to red or blue. Instead, they have 5 different ideological choices ranging from market fundamentalism to full-blown socialism. Some of these parties shape the state's laws directly, while others influence the debate from the outside. Whether you're a voter candidate or just trying to figure out where your own town budget priorities came from, knowing what these parties stand for is essential, because in Vermont, politics isn't just a 2-lane road, it's a 5-way intersection. Now, I agree to some extent it is. On some days up in the State House, it is a 5-way intersection. And sometimes the average Vermonter walking around the State House would feel like a deer in the headlights trying to follow the debate sometimes. But the reason I brought this article up, after everything we talked about, whether it be what I believe is federal or national common sense at the national level with the deregulation and the end of the endangerment finding and the end of subsidies for wind and solar, and looking at them on a level playing field with things like coal, oil, and natural gas, and and nuclear, then we will be a much more affordable state and country, and we will be a much more profitable state and a more profitable country. So, but the reason I brought this up after the other two segments was, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important, and one of the reasons why we still, and I keep saying, hear it right side up, we try to inform you, okay? We try to inform you. We want you to be an informed voter. So if you know, if just because you heard from your representative doesn't mean they are in your corner with respect to your taxes, your personal property rights, your private property rights, your individual rights. Know what their voting history is. Keep track of what they're saying. Maybe go and just go up to your state house, even in New Hampshire. I know in Vermont, it's the People's House. Go there. Just walk around. Sit and listen during the debates. Find a committee. If there's a seat open in a committee and you just want to sit and audit it, I don't think that anybody would stop you from going and sitting and auditing. So you can actually know, you could see your representatives in action. So you can then know if that person represents you and what you stand for. And does it stand for with respect to Vermont? Does that person want to see the heritage and the personality and the freedoms and everything that is Vermont from the first day that it was a republic to now? Do they represent those type of ideals and your ideals? So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of another show. We're actually running a little over. Just remember, stay safe, stay informed, listen to Right Side Up.